Welcome to Butterflies of Wisdom, everyone. Man, I don't know how I got this lucky. I have, I guess, one of my favorite podcasters with me on the other end of the line. Her name is Rana, and she is the host of one of my favorite podcasts that comes out on Wednesday mornings, and I listen to it religiously. And you can find it on iTunes, Stitcher, any podcast app. Just type in Dreams and Drives, and she's had people with cancer, people who are solo entrepreneurs. She's had them all, and they're all incredible. So yes, please, as you're listening to this podcast, slide it down, hit the search button, and in iTunes or in Stitcher or wherever you're catching this podcast, and type in Dreams and Drives, and you'll be amazed what Rana can produce. And so without further ado, I'm going to let Rana take it away.
Hi, everyone who's listening to Butterflies of Wisdom. This is Rana Campbell here, and I am the host of Dreams and Drive, as Wynn so eloquently introduced me. Thank you so much for being a listener of the show. I started Dreams and Drive back in January of 2016, and it's a podcast for creatives and lifestyle entrepreneurs who want to learn how to take their dreams out of park and into drive. And to date, we've interviewed over 70 guests. It has been such a whirlwind over the past year and a few months of doing the podcast. Beyond the podcast, I am a marketing specialist. So my day job is I work at an e-commerce fulfillment company, and I work in the marketing and sales department, do a lot of fun content marketing, email marketing, all that fun stuff. And I also have my own blog, which is just my name, ranacampbell.com. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I graduated from Princeton in 2013. My parents are Jamaican, so I'm Caribbean. I love to dance, and I love chocolate.
Yes, you do. And I have the Caribbean background myself. My mom immigrated to the U.S. from the Bahamas, believe it or not. So I have been to the Caribbean so many times in my life. But Jamaica I have not been to. That's on my bucket list later. And so I want to ask you now, what has been your favorite interview you have done so far on the Dreams and Drives podcast?
Oh my gosh, you're putting me on the spot here. Oh, that's a good
Yes.
one.
Yes.
There's so many that come to mind, but I think one of my favorite has been the one with Levante, and I want to say that's episode 48. Let me just make sure that it's the right one. Yeah, it's episode 48 with Levante, and it's called How to Nurture Your Gifts and Find Your Light. And I think the reason why I like that one is just because Levante's spirit is. If you listen to that one, it was kind of like a therapy session for me. I just felt so at ease talking to her, and I think the notion of really figuring out what your unique gift is and living in that gift is something that we a lot of times run from. So yeah, that was one of my favorites, just from how it made me feel in listening to Levante.
Okay, now I have to go back and listen to that one because I don't remember listening to that one.
Do you have a favorite?
Now, I have a favorite. My own podcast of yours, I actually do have a favorite of yours, and we'll get into that in a minute. I actually have a question leading up to that one. You had a very interesting experience, and I won't give it all away, so we get listened to that one. But you did an interview with a friend of yours, I believe, who then texted you and said, guess what? This dream job never happened. So then we now we have to redo the interview. How did that make you feel as an interviewer? Were you like, okay, let's do it? Or were you like, okay, now what? Am I supposed to ask this?
Oh my gosh, yes, that was episode 59 with Courtney Futch. And in that episode, she actually did have her dream job. So she was at this company, she loved it, and she just thought she was going to grow there. This was going to be where she would spend the rest of her life. And then she texted me a few days after we did the original interview and said she got fired. And I was just like, what? Oh my gosh. And from a podcast standpoint, I was just thinking, so, do I air it? I was kind of a little disappointed just because I had scheduled it to go live like the next week or so. Then I realized that wasn't going to happen. So I just let it happen naturally. She told me that she couldn't give me all the details, but she would get back to me. And when she did get back to me, she told me the story. And I was just like, you know what? This was an opportunity to do something different that I hadn't done before. So I leveraged it that way, and that's how we had two parts to that one. So there's episode 59, there's episode 60. So it was kind of like me freaking out in the beginning and thinking, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing. But then realizing, this is real life. This is what happens to a lot of people. You think something's going to happen, and then your life totally changes, and you have to just adapt. So I adapted, and we had our first two-part segment, our first interview that was in two parts.
Well, you did a very good job adapting. I would recommend you guys go listen to that two-part episode. It's very revealing, and you both did a great job in the swing of life. Let's call it the swing of life. I mean, we all can't be perfect, and then Lena and I are not perfect. So I know you had a blog at one point on it and then transferred over to a podcast. Why was that?
Well, I thought the podcast was just a natural continuation of something that I already loved. So I had been doing blogging and writing for different magazines, and I always had been interviewing entrepreneurs, but I was kind of doing it the editorial route. So I would, interview them, record it, then transcribe the interview, and then edit the interview, then put it up. So I was doing really good interviews, but no one was really reading them. I feel like you were only reading them if you were really interested in the person and you wanted to get all the nuggets of information. So I thought that having a podcast would be the best natural progression to my career, my interest. But let me tell you, when I was so nervous and I kind of had been putting it off for a long, long time. A lot of people have always told me, Rana, you have a unique voice. You're really good at engaging with people. Why don't you try to do video? Why don't you try to do a podcast or something like that? And I was just so stuck on, nope, I just like putting up my interviews on my blog. I'm not going to do that. And look, when I finally, it was actually a guest who told me, just do it. What are you waiting for? And so I committed to putting out the podcast on January 1st of 2016, and we haven't looked back since then. It really was me forcing myself to stop running from what I knew was a gift of mine. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it makes sense. And just to give you guys a tip, 90% of podcasts are consumed mobilely, whether it be on Android or iPhones or cell phones in general. And people are not reading blogs as much as it is. I have a friend who has a very successful blog locally out in Aspen, Colorado. And I finally convinced her to do a podcast. I said, look, you are not getting the traction on the blog that you should be. And so now she's doing a podcast, which I'm going to be on. Thank you very much. Because she now wants to interview me after I convinced her to do a podcast, because I think that we don't have time to sit through a blog and read it. And so I agree with Lena that it's natural progression for those who can't type like myself. And for those who want to be stuck in people's earballs at the gym, and because you obviously can't read the blog at the gym.
Yeah, so true. And it's something that you can do while on the go. And I feel like that's kind of the way, like, the way audience is interacting with media is changing. So people want something that's more interactive, something that suits their lifestyle. And a lot of the people who tell me they listen to my podcast listen to it while driving to work, listen to it while you're doing something else. So you're able to multitask. And I think that's something that gives podcast a leverage point because, you know, you can listen to this while you're cooking. You can listen to this while you're doing something instead of, you know, being able to listen to it instead of cooking. Like you need to cook, you know what I mean? So it's definitely it's not burdensome on the listener.
No, it's not burdensome on the listener. And before I turn the mic over to you, I want to ask you 2 more questions. One is, what is your favorite podcast that you can recommend to all my listeners that they listen to? And yes, you can be biased and say mine. And then the other one is, where can people find you and where can people find your amazing podcast?
Oh, yeah, so I was just thinking about this before coming on the show, and I was thinking, like, what was the podcast that got me into podcasting? And I had to go way back. And I remember the first podcast that I listened to that I really enjoyed was this podcast called Loveumentary, and I think it was only on SoundCloud at that point. And it was a guy, Nate Bagley, and what he did was he interviewed couples about how they fell in love and how they still fallen in love. And I just loved that podcast so much. I was obsessed with it. It also was part of his blog, and I would listen to it a lot of times. And I think me liking that podcast and listening to it influenced the way that I interview my people on my podcast. I really like getting to the heart of things. So I love podcasts that speak to the heart. And although my podcast is about business and lifestyle tips and entrepreneurship and all that stuff, I really try to make the guests feel like they are people and I'm not just grilling them. You know what I mean? And so another podcast I love on that note, and which inspired mine, was Lewis Howes' School of Greatness. Have you ever heard of that one?
I haven't. I need to now subscribe to Lewis Howes because I have finally subscribed to John Lee Dumas's podcast, which is Entrepreneur on Fire, and then I've finally subscribed to Pat Flynn's Smart Passive Income podcast. Took me a long time. And I've finally subscribed to Serial, which I haven't quite got into yet, but now I need to subscribe to Lewis Howes.
Yeah, I like Lewis Howes. I also love Side Hustle Pro. I love Myleik Teal's My Taught You, Sakita Holly's Hashtag and Stilettos. I actually got into one of my recent guests, Dre Baldwin. He has a podcast, Work on Your Game. I love NPR's How I Built This. And one of my guilty pleasures is the Rap Radar podcast and also the Casey Crew podcast. Those are among my favorites.
Aha. You can name it and all. And yes, I have to get into What's on Your Game because I just listened to your episode yesterday, and so that's on my to-do list for today is to subscribe to that podcast.
Mhm.
And now I'm going
where can people find the podcast, right? Was that the
Yes.
Yes. You can
where can people find the podcast?
So you can listen to it at the website, www.dreamsanddrive.com. We're also, as Wynn stated earlier, we're on all the podcast directories. So the iTunes, you can search Dreams and Drive, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, podcast apps, like anywhere, just search Dreams and Drive, and you can definitely find us, listen, and subscribe.
Yes, and subscribe because then you will always see the episodes on Wednesday mornings and the occasional Sunday. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know your podcast comes
I
out
changed it
on
actually.
Wednesday.
I changed it. Well, I'm playing around with it. So it normally comes out every Wednesday, but this week we came out Monday and Thursday because I'm just trying to see if I change the time to how listenership changes. So it's weekly. You can find a new podcast weekly. I'm changing the release dates, but we used to come out every Wednesday. We might go back to doing Wednesdays, but I'm just doing a mini experiment right now.
In my personal opinion, I think Mondays are the best time for a podcast to come out because people can catch it on their Monday morning commute.
I agree with you. And you know what? This past Tuesday has been the second highest download day that I've had since launching.
Well, congratulations on that. Congratulations on that. So now I'm going to let the Queen of Dreams and Drive the mic on me and ask me 2 to 3 questions that she wants to ask me.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I'm really, inspired by you, Wynn, is, I don't know if you know this, but I grew up in a household with a parent who had a disability. My mom, we were in a very bad car accident when I was younger, and so my mom was permanently disabled because of that, and I know that disability is something that also is important, is a part of your life and, really important to the things that you do. And so my question is, what really inspires you? What keeps you motivated? Because I know growing up a lot of times things were very difficult for my mother, and I witnessed that firsthand. So I just wonder, within your own journey, what has really inspired you?
Well, Geez, now you put a lump in my shoulder.
I'm sorry. I really am.
No. I was not prepared for that question, but I wasn't prepared for you to give me background either while you were asking that question. But I have decided that I had a tragic loss in my life when I was 23. I'm almost 30 years old. It will be 7 years since that tragic loss, which I still admit, I come a win, which I still admit on the podcast. I Come a Win will be found on Amazon if you guys want to go check that out. And so who inspires me and what inspires me and what keeps me motivated? I am really blessed. I was really blessed not only to grow up in a third world country, i.e. the Bahamas, and Nassau to be exact, but I was also really blessed to have able-bodied support system. I didn't go to school with disabled whatsoever. All my classmates, and still to this day when I returned to college to pursue my dreams in a journalism degree, which will be starting next Tuesday, I have been always blessed to have the able-bodied. So I think growing up as a non-disabled woman, I think that really helped, even though I have my physical challenges of cerebral palsy, and I think that really helped.
Okay. And what's something that you are currently working on with your own podcast? Or what's some things that you're really excited about with growing your own podcast?
I am really excited about that. I have reached 4 years with this podcast, not in this format by any means, but I am really excited that I'm now reaching a fan base that I'm now reaching, and I hope to get 700 downloads per episode. Right now I'm getting between 100 and 500, but I know that, and I do have the sponsors on the smaller side, but I want those big sponsors like we all do, but the download numbers have to increase, not decrease, before the big sponsors will even look at me.
I am with that same struggle, girl. So I definitely know how you feel, and you know what? I believe in us, and we will get the sponsors that we so desire.
Yes, we will. And so, if you guys want to go share podcasts, share dreams and drive us out, share butterflies and with them out, that will help with social download numbers. And please, this won't turn into Link's Vegas on us, just not careful. But please leave a review for those podcasts on iTunes, and because it helps with the rankings, and it gets more eyeballs on the podcast. And even though iTunes is a little bit slow, and although I think the reviews help with the podcast tremendously, and they don't have the 5-star reviews by any means. They just have to be a review. I really like this episode, and one of the tricks I'm going to steal from Lena here is, what did you learn on this episode? And I'm going to ask it on social media, because I think Lena does a really good job on social media and replying to all of us, those of us who listen to Dreams and Drives and everything else.
Thank you. Yeah, I really try to, get in there and engage, because as you know, I think engagement really helps everyone on both parts. I want to be really interactive, and hopefully there'll be a day when I have a social media team, but right now it's just me, so I have no excuses on why I can't respond to people and just show appreciation.
Yes, you have no excuses, and I have no excuses either. And I appreciate you coming on this podcast and sharing your story just a little bit. And see, this is what I get to know my favorite podcasters, when they get to be on the other side of my mic. And so I didn't realize that you had a disabled family member until today. And so I just hope that it impacted you in a good way, not in a bad way. But I just hope the Caribbean culture, your Caribbean culture, as mine is still strong. I mean, I would go to the Bahamas and that for their disabled education system in 2 seconds flat if I can. And I don't know about Jamaica's, but I just hope that our heritage remains strong and just remains where it is, and we're just trying to bridge the gap and share inspirational stories. And I hope you guys enjoy another fabulous episode. I'll be doing these episodes throughout the day. Today I get to interview another awesome person. I'm not giving away yet, but you will find out. And so this episode is sponsored by Grace by Grit. Grace by Grit is a clothing line out of California. If you want to go back and hear their entire story, you're more than welcome to it. Grace by Grit is giving you a 20% off code, and this podcast is also sponsored by Go Kidder, K-I-T-T-E-R, Kidder.com is a Twitter desktop app where you can post the tweets. They put the hashtags with it, and Kidder's been nothing but supportive of this podcast. And so I hope you guys enjoy another fabulous episode with Lainey and I. And thanks, you guys.
Thanks. Bye.